Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the 9th IBA International Biennial Conference in Pristina on the occasion of and in collaboration with Manifesta 14. I guess the conference will be mostly in English, but we have simultaneous translation. The headsets are actually at the entrance. Via 3 channels, you can listen to the conversations in Albanian or English, if that's not your language, or Serbian. Just to reiterate, for the ones that were not here yesterday, this conference examines the broadening of the biennial format, addressing biennials as tools for educational, social, and cultural development, with a focus on a community-oriented approach and looking at conflict and/or post-conflict times and zones. My name is Marieke van Haal. I'm Head of Research and Development at Manifesta. So today we have 2 very interesting panels, and I would suggest to start immediately with the first panel, which is titled about the power of culture, education, and mediation in times of crisis. I'd like to introduce the moderators, Christian Oxenius, Head of Research and Content Manager of IBA, and Alex Fischer, Writer, Curator, and former Fulbright Scholar in Ukraine. We need to apologize for Lara Khaldi, who was supposed to be with us here but couldn't make it yesterday. But she's present via Zoom, as well as Reem Rizk from Lebanon via Zoom. And Jen, just a practical request, if you are able to put your phones on silent, that would be really nice. And just to let you know that you can inform your friends and colleagues abroad that this conference can be followed online via the link which is in the program. And of course, later on, everyone can pose questions to the panelists, and also people from abroad that follow the conference online can pose questions in the chat of the Zoom link. So, welcome.
Thank you everyone for being here. A special thanks for Yuliia and Kateryna that joined us physically here. And of course to Alex for accepting to moderate, to co-moderate this panel. I also want to extend my thanks to Hedwig, to Marieke, to the whole team of Manifesta, as well as Carlo and Enes that are working behind the scenes to make this possible on a technical level. It has been fantastic to be here in Pristina. The collaboration and the possibility of being here, I think, made it even more evident what biennials coming together can do and what we can achieve by talking to each other. And yeah, I look forward to the panel. I will keep the introduction very brief to give more space to the speakers to talk. And yeah, I would like to start with maybe the 2 speakers which are not here. Very briefly. And so I'll introduce Reem Rizk, who is a program coordinator at Ashkal and Alwan, the Lebanese Association for Plastic Arts, and an instructor of Civilization Studies at the American University in Beirut. She is currently completing her MA thesis at the Université Saint-Joseph in Beirut, titled The Crisis of Art, Criticism in Lebanon, 1975-2006, Rethinking Relationships Between Politics and Art through Contemporary Art and Archival Material. I'll also introduce very briefly Lara so that the rest of the conversation can go very smoothly. Lara Khaldi is a curator and an artist. She was a member of the artistic team of Documenta 15. Khaldi worked as the head of media studies program at Al-Quds Bard College between 2018 and 2020. She has taught at the Sandberg Institute between 2020 and 22. And she was recently appointed as director at the Apple Art Center in Amsterdam. where she's due to start in 2023. Thank you. And I had the panel to Alex.
Thank you so much, Christian. Mirmanjes, good morning. Falamderet to all Kosovar colleagues for this really warm and special welcome. It's fantastic to be back in Pristina on a gorgeous fall day. My name is Alex, as Marika kindly introduced. It's wonderful to see in the audience several Ukrainian colleagues, and of course to have two dear Ukrainian colleagues join us for this panel. So it is my utmost pleasure to do a brief introduction of Yuliia and Kateryna. First, Yuliia Hnat has long and storied career working in the public and private sector with Ukrainian cultural institutions. Her CV highlights include being head of information and analytics for the Ukrainian Institute, which is the cultural arm of the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She served as the deputy director of the National Art Museum of Ukraine, for which she was responsible for re-envisioning how the museum worked with its collection and acquired new works. She's also the co-founder of the Museum of Contemporary Art NGO, which is an NGO that is focused on looking at what a Museum of Contemporary Art in Ukraine could, should, can, and will be. As part of her responsibilities with the MOCA NGO, as we can refer to it from this point forward, she's also a co-head of the Ukrainian Emergency Art Fund, which she will speak about quite a lot in her presentation, and which, as a scholar focused on the Ukrainian context, I must say I'm been so floored with the speed, agility, and capacity that the Ukrainian Emergency Art Fund has had since escalation, full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. One thing I also wanted to mention from Yuliia's CV that is not always highlighted is that Yuliia also has a background in risk management from her background when she was working in the financial sector. And this experience, I think, is proving really critical right now and is informing the strategies by which you are working with the NGO. So that's a bit about Yuliia. We'll learn more later. Shifting gears, Kateryna Iakovlenko, a visual culture researcher, curator, essayist, public intellectual. Kateryna is originally coming from Eastern Ukraine, but has lived for many years now in Kyiv. She has worked on a host of projects. What I really admire about Kateryna, amongst other things, is that she's really expanded the definition of Ukrainian art history by virtue of her pioneering scholarship on artists from the eastern part of the country, as well as her scholarship on women artists in Ukraine, for which she has published the book on this topic, and she is also involved with the secondary archive, which is a participant in Manifesta 14 Pristina and is featured at the National Gallery of Kosovo. Currently, Kateryna is based in London, where she is a senior researcher at University College London. So thank you very much for being with us. A brief word about the format of this panel this morning. We will proceed for the next 45 minutes to an hour with short presentations by our four panelists, after which Christian and I will pose them a few questions, and then we will open it up to the audience for a Q&A. And we really want to leave a long amount of time for that, so please start thinking of your questions as you hear from the panelists. With that, I would like to introduce Kateryna Iakovlenko, who will offer our first presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. First, thank you for being here. My big gratefulness to the Kosovo sitting, to Manifesta 14, to invite us. And being to me here, it means that I'm standing in behalf of many Ukrainians who are fighting now, who cannot leave the country, who are in Russian prison right now. It's more than 2,500 of people. Among them also Ukrainian artists in the front line, in the prison as well. And for example, 2 days ago, Ukrainian artist from Kherson and also director of the contemporary art in Kherson was kidnapped by Russians. So we now understand this responsibility for all of these people, and my speech made in behalf of all of them. And this is, maybe I also will shortly tell you about myself. As Alex mentioned, I'm Ukrainian visual culture researcher, and I was born 50 kilometers from the Russian-Ukrainian border. And I know that many of you perhaps experienced this war since February 24, but unfortunately for me, this war happened and started in spring 2014 when Russia occupied Crimea, annexed Crimea and occupied Donetsk and Luhansk region, claiming that this is our area, their area, but I was born in a Russian-speaking family because of long-term repressions of Ukrainian language speakers in Donbass. So I want to assure you that this is a legal invasion and this is a heavy crime that we will and how to solve in following days and following years. I hope it would be done soon. Today we're speaking about education, and this is very critical thing because the role of culture and education is really big, not only in terms of crisis in general in life. And this is 22 years old, a student of art school in Mariupol. His name is Yegor Zakharov. And this portrait made by his father. Yegor Zakharov spent 24 days in Mariupol, experiencing all of this heavy shell and missiles attack, and he spent all this time in an art school dormitory with his friends. Of course, he left by his feet. You can imagine that the Mariupol city is just huge. It's a millionaire city. So he spent by his feet just to come to Ukrainian territory and to be in safe. This is his images. So he personally see how the missiles and aircrafts come from the sea. He saw explosion. He saw how districts around was destroyed. And this is the questions, what kind of art he could do in such circumstances. Does he have this ability to create something? Does he have this ability to reflect on something? Or he just needs to survive? He tried to do and entertain himself and also his friends, because otherwise you have to stay realistic, but also stay in and keep your mind cold, because you have to react normally, like not too emotionally or too engaged in the situation, but just to recognize what is real danger. And this is, maybe some of you know the poster. This is exact image that did his father in the early beginning of occupation of Donetsk. And the thing is that his father was not an artist. He finished art school, but for his whole life, because of no infrastructure, he was working for design and architectural firm. He produced some furniture and do some ordinary life work and never participated in political life like activist or something like this. But when the occupation started, he decided that art could not be something which is not connected to the politics. Art is very connected to the politics, so he decided to be a local Banksy, and over the night he put all of these images over the city, and then he was kidnapped and they beaten him in the prison. So he spent lots of time under the repressions of the so-called Donetsk People Republic. And the thing is that this guy, who was quite active in separatists movement and Russian movement in Donetsk, is quite well known here as well, because he was participating in Bosnian War in 1992, as well as many other Russian war as a Russian volunteer for the crime. So his name is Igor Girkin, and now he is in Kherson. in the same place where Vyacheslav Mashnitsky was kidnapped. And experiences these horrible things in the prison, he decides that he could not, again, like stand behind of this. And after he was able to, he was liberated from the prison, he made this sketchbook about his experience in prison. And the thing is that we always talking about the culture that will come after the violence. But I want to mention that violence come on the place where culture was before and was the cultural institutions. Like, for example, it was Izolyatsiya that was created in 2011 by local businessman and woman who wants to bring Donetsk to the cultural map and to mapping this city in the global cultural infrastructure. So they created a huge contemporary art center in a place where was the plant for isolation materials. They created different huge exhibitions, labs, developed educational program, and at that time I was a volunteer in this center, and I quite was like engaged to the programming as well in this center. I started working with them in 2015 when they already moved to Kyiv, and their territory was seized by the Donetsk People's Republic, and they organized their political prison, and you can find it in a quite famous book by Stanislav Vaseyev, political prisoner who spent the time in this place. And the thing is that it was quite interesting how Russians and pro-Russian activists comes to this area, because they was fighting with contemporary art. And you see here this huge pipe. This is monument to whole woman who was developed the city after the Second World War, especially. But the thing is that the whole female history in this region is just hidden. So they blew up this monument, as many other art pieces that was on this area. And with this big pipe, they also burned myself, because I am also this woman from the Donbass who wants to develop this region after the war, and who take active participation in this even before the war and during the war. So you can see this is a screenshot from the Izolyatsiya website about the stolen art, about art that have been destructed and sheltered by Russians and pro-Russians activists. And Izolyatsiya is still in Kyiv, and they have no access to their equipment, to their artworks, and to their heritage. But also the most critical thing to them is that Izolyatsiya has huge self-made monuments to deer, and it was made by people who were working on this factory. So it's not only about the art that artists made for, just to express themselves. It's also for this grassrooted art, which made by ordinary people who were working on this place and who want to make this place better for them. But what is also interesting, that Russia hides not only information about Ukrainian culture, don't want to recognize us as a state and nation, but also they hide information about the Izolyatsiya concentration camps that they created on the contemporary art institution. But Izolyatsiya is just one case of many others. Since February 24, Ukrainian Ministry of Culture creates a website where online you can put all the information about stolen museums, religious objects, cultural destroyed infrastructures, stolen art objects, and everything that have been damaged and destroyed by Russian army. And this is very critical because we want to collect all of this information and we want to apply for justice after all. Because the question of our resistance and our presence here, it's not just all about how brave we are, it's a question about how we will solve this issue after all, and what is justice for all of us. So this is 3 artworks that have been made by Katya Buchatska, the artist from Kyiv. She usually works with lots of materials, and she was thinking to open museum of Palatka Plitka Horetsvit, the photographer from Ivano-Frankivsk regions just before the war. But unfortunately, war changed the situation and museum didn't open the first exhibition which Katya made. So she moved to Lviv at that time and was thinking how she could do art in these circumstances and if she able to speak about art, if it's important or not. But then she was starting looking for the materials and she immediately recognized that she could not, I mean, of course, she cannot use Russian materials anymore, but 2 Ukrainian factories that produces oil for painting, they was damaged and destroyed by Russians during the missile attack. So we have no materials right now. And then she starts thinking how she can create oil by herself and recognize that oil made from the land, from the soil. So she came to Bucha, Moshun, and Hostomel to take this traumatic land and to create oil from this land. And she made these abstract paintings in yellow, brown, and black, just to remind this violence and their connection with culture. Now you see into different images. In your left, it's a painting from the beginning of 20th century. It's made by Mark Chagall. He is an artist from Belarus, but he was involved a lot in Ukrainian avant-garde movement, and especially this drawing was made for Ukrainian organization, Ukrainian Jewish organization called Kulturliga, who supported a lot Jewish avant-garde as well, like theater, paintings, and so many other genres. And this book was dedicated to the Jewish pogroms, to people who was displaced, to families that have been killed, and stories that have been forbidden and forgotten for many years. And your right is a contemporary artwork by Yuri Bolsa, who now displaced artists. And you see these connections between 2 quite very different artists. You see these connections between 2 different contexts, but still we experiencing the same. And this is quite famous artwork of Ilya Kabakov and Emilia Kabakova, the man who flew into the space from the apartment. And from this exact work, Russia started the famous Russian cosmism story. But the thing is that Kabakov is from Dnipro, which is in Ukraine right now. And also the most important thing that this city was developed for nuclear power and nuclear weapons and for military infrastructure. So that's why it was closed. This is, I guess, house after the Russian shelling. And looking to these differences and similarities, I was thinking about real power of culture. What culture does have power if the country which this culture belongs do not have enough weapons, do not have nuclear system, do not protect it with energy. If this culture in the position of defense, what kind of power do all of these artists have? And then I also saw images of my destroyed apartment in Irpin, where I was spent a week. And after all, we all recognize that it's impossible to be in this place. I escaped, but my apartment and all of my stuff, all my collection of contemporary art was destroyed, all books and everything. And then I decided that it's maybe it's the best thing that I can do to deal with all of this. It just make exhibition, and my exhibition was dedicated not to the trauma, but how we can live with this trauma. Also the question about lost archives, because I have only one artwork that have been saved, and this is because artist forgot to give it to me back. So thanks to him. But the thing is that the whole story we're writing about our contemporary art, about our art history, is based on the art objects and art pieces that have been saved and that have been done to us from the previous generation. But the thing is that in Ukrainian case, we have lots of depths, and this generation wasn't connected with each other for many reasons. And in this case, we have to rethink our art history in terms of loss and destruction and the violence. Alex already mentioned the secondary archive, and the big surprise that the presentation of this project we did just a day before the full-scale invasion started. We feel huge anxiety about our future, but still we present 50 profiles of Ukrainian artists who needs to be in the global history of art as well, because they are very talented, not because they are from Ukraine, which is interesting place right now. For some people, this is like sort of Orientalism because this is too far and it's too exotic. But these all artists, they are professional, they are speaking about important topics, so you can easily search them in the secondary archive. But the thing is that we developed these 50 profiles also to connect the Ukrainian Soviet history with the contemporary times. And we include 5 artists from the 60s. And the thing is that lots of change have been done since that time. One artist, she was in occupation in Luhansk. Another artist, she died. And this famous mosaics by Alla Horska, who was killed by KGB in 1970, was destroyed in Mariupol just a couple of months ago. The thing is that Horska created all of these mosaics in Luhansk and Donetsk region because she wants to develop her ideas, which was quite directly connected with avant-garde as well and with Ukrainian ethnic traditions. In the regions, in peripheries, because in the center it was no possibility to create anything more freely. But now she experienced, with her work, violence for the second time. In the beginning of full-scale invasion, I was thinking that I would never write and I would never speak. As many Ukrainians, I feel myself speechless and helpless, and I was thinking that art is not, that field that I should participate in, much more important to be somewhere more active. But then when I saw my destroyed apartment, I decided that I have something to say. And of course, we all feel huge rage. And some people are scared about this. Why you're so angry? Why you are so brutal? But this is not the question of brutality. This is not the questions of being in hate. It is a question about the justice, as I said before. And we do not want to change Russia. We just want to change the rule. We want to give voice for people and for communities that have been silenced, they have been in a minor position. And this is not only Ukrainian question. It's not about the questions anymore. This is time also to give some answers. And I hope that Ukrainians and Ukrainian society will give this opportunity to change the rules and to give some sort of belief to people who didn't have subjectivity or didn't have lots of opportunity to present their works, their societies as well, to give them understanding that everything could be possible, and then that now we are in the situation to do some changes and to act. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kateryna. I'm sure we will go back to some of the things that you talked about later on in the Q&A, as well as between us probably in the discussion. I wanted to now ask if Reem is with us and connected. I believe she is. Hello, Reem.
How are you?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for connecting. Reem is connecting to us from Lebanon, from Beirut. And we're grateful to have the possibility to connect with her because the situation in Beirut is such that we had to plan this a little bit because there is no continuity of electricity, of internet, and so on. So thank you for making it possible. And I leave you the floor. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for having me today. It's such a big honor to be with you. Thanks, Christian and Alex, for briefly introducing me. And thank you, Kateryna, for this insight. It's very interesting to learn about what's going on around in Ukraine and to actually see some close insight. As for me today, I would be talking about Ashkal Alwan. Ashkal Alwan is the Lebanese Association for Plastic Arts, and I would try to focus on the power of education, the theme of our panel. So the question of imagining and building or sustaining an art institution that not only responds to shifting material conditions, but also reshapes itself as a result, has been Ashkal Alwan's concern ever since its inception. Though its formal registration as a non-profit at the Lebanese Ministry of Interior and Municipalities was enacted at a later stage, Ashkal Alwan, the Lebanese Association for Plastic Arts, was born in and around crisis. The 90s was a time where the post-war reconstruction Beirut, or project in Beirut, was taking shape. Like most regional cultural institutions, we learned to navigate a terrain where a force majeure event is always at the precipice of unfolding. At the time, artists and colleagues were obstinately imposing a vision of artistic practice as a vessel through which civic discourse should exist and express itself in the public realm. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, Ashkal Alwan operated as a nomadic institution, organizing interventions in public spaces as well as cooperating with cultural institutions and venues in Beirut to create room for contextualized debates, exhibitions, and performances aiming to address a shifting political realm and foster a critical discourse around regional urgencies. When Ashkal Alwan launched the first edition of the Homeworks Forum, which is a multidisciplinary forum where we present every 3 years a full iteration of performances, of exhibitions and lectures, panels, screenings, and publications to audiences in Beirut, it was not simply conceived as a platform for circulation and presentation of artworks and discourses. We rather imagined it to be an active laboratory for articulating ideas and aesthetic strategies, and a stage to, more importantly, rehearse civicness and communal belonging. In 2002, the first edition invited artists, writers, and thinkers to explore the notion of dislocation amidst the current geopolitical and economic climate of the Arab region. Though the times have changed since then, through each edition of Homeworks, we continue to situate ourselves within this legacy of exchange rooted in urgency. Organizing over 8 editions of Homeworks Forum in a volatile context has unfortunately taught us to make do with the conditions at hand and repeat emergency models as the years would go by until they formed a sort of an institutional life of their own. I would try to focus as much as possible on the power of education, and this is represented in Ashkal Alwan through our main program, which is homework space program, or what we call here HWP. So HWP is Ashkal Alwan's 10-month art study program, which was launched in 2011 and has concluded over 11 editions so far. Homework Space program started out as a program aiming to respond to prevailing shortcomings in critical arts and humanities studies in the region, and has sought over the years to continue to be attentive to the shifts in the educational offering available for young artists. It was a way for Ashkal Alwan to extend the Homeworks Forum in time and space, and to ensure that the issues that were debated in the Homeworks Forum were discussed within the same realm every 3 years for a limited period could continue to be engaged with and explored. We were prompt to consider the possibility of moving into a physical space that would act as a communal ecosystem for artists, for scholars, activists, and cultural practitioners. The program is open to artists from Lebanon, from the Arab region, and the world over to develop their formal, technical, and theoretical skills in a critical setting, and it provides enrolled fellows with feedback and resources to facilitate and support their art practice. HWP is organized annually around workshops, seminars, lectures, group critiques, and studio visits. A few words on the structure and the curriculum of HWP. We have visiting professors, which we call the VPs, and their invited guests. They organize workshops and seminars based on their own practices. Alongside the work of the VPs, the curriculum includes a series of seminars to complement the fellows' general theoretical and art historical knowledge that is offered by guest professors. At the same time, we have advisors who follow the fellows' work throughout the year. They are responsible to organizing group critiques and one-to-one sessions. Each year, a preface to the program is organized by an invited guest or a preface leader. In these first 3 weeks of HWP, fellows introduce their work, and then they are introduced to the HWP program, and at the same time, they are oriented to Lebanon's urban and cultural geography through site visits and talks. Homework Space program provided many artists and cultural practitioners with an opportunity to produce and think alongside peers from the region and beyond. HWP was and still is a vibrant, urgent energy of people meeting and affecting each other. They're also affected by the city, they're affected by the political situation and the institutions. To design a platform for the fellows as a continuous one takes an enormous amount of work and perseverance. It becomes a year-round space of doing, of thinking, and happening, and a space for people to take time off from the stress of production and market pressures. HWP has acted many times as a passport for young local artists, some of whom had no prior formal training in the arts, to continue their studies and to produce abroad. HWP continues to work like a traditional course in that it has a solid structure with seminars and group critiques, but its fluidity lies in its refusal to reproduce calcified notions of a recurring faculty or a curriculum, and its openness to the visions of visiting artists and professors each year. Ashkal Alwan manifested itself as an open structure for artistic exchange and knowledge production, hosting seminars, workshops, exhibitions, and performances for the public to convene and to engage in modes of study and discussion. The space also housed artist studios that accommodated HWP's program activities. In addition to that, it housed a library comprising an ever-growing collection of publications and audiovisual material, always focusing on cultural, artistic, and literary practices. A bit on this crisis situation that you briefly mentioned previously. From mid-2019 onwards, Lebanon started grappling with 3 different crises unfolding simultaneously. First, an economic and financial crisis that is characterized by the ongoing devaluation of the local currency. Second, a crisis of political legitimation brought forth by the October 17 uprisings and the protesters' call for dismantling over 30 years of systemic corruption and sectarianism. And as we all already know, as of March 2020, a global sanitary crisis with the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic. On October 17, 2019, protests broke out across Beirut, later leading to a national uprising, and coincided with the opening night of Homeworks 8. As a result, the entirety of the program and the exhibitions that we had planned were either postponed or cancelled. Additionally, and for the first time since its launching, visas for our international and regional fellows participating in this program had been rejected by the Ministry of Interior, signaling a new era of cultural isolation and severed relations between the state and the non-governmental sector. Though the fellows' residencies were eventually secured, the incident cast a cloud of uncertainty on the educational program's continuity and sustainability. From now and since then, the institution's challenges became manifold. The banking sector's capital controls on international wire transfers and foreign currency transactions resulted in sector-wide incapacity to meet financial obligations, with most and the majority of our resources either locked or made to disappear because of the currency devaluation. We were, and we continue to be incapacitated to run our operations or plan for the future. We have also been pushed to discontinue and manage alternative routes for our ongoing projects with artists outside of Lebanon, as well as our financial support to local community members who depend on aid to carry through with production-related tasks or studies abroad. Furthermore, in March 2020, the 9th edition of Homework Space program was discontinued due to our inability to secure the health and safety of our fellows during their stay in Beirut. Fortunately, most of the seminars and workshops or one-to-one sessions we planned for this edition were moved online. Last, not least, on August 4, 2020, a large amount of ammonium nitrate stored at the port of the city of Beirut exploded. It caused at least 220 deaths, 6,500 injuries, and 10 to 15 billion US dollars in property damage. It left an estimated 300,000 people homeless. As a result, Ashkal Alwan directed its efforts to repurposing its facilities and accommodating artists, cultural workers, and activists in Beirut who lost their spaces and income due to the unfolding simultaneous financial, political, and sanitary crisis. We were convinced at that time that by focusing our efforts towards making our space available and open to the public, we would be able to aid the artists operating within our ecosystem to reclaim their material and intellectual agency, to push their practices and retrieve at least part of their losses. It goes without saying that these crises have not only affected the cultural sector, but are actively threatening its very core existence. This has again led to a succession of trials and errors, whereby the porosity of our space served and still serves as a blueprint to think through potential configurations that would best fit our communities. Because the foundation of the institution is its network rather than the space, we were able to exist on, as well as reinforce our alternative digital platforms using the simplest available tools at hand. By making HWP an open format in online or hybrid form, we invited participants to define their own presence and their own contribution to the program as they saw fit and possible for them. And so in December 2020, we launched the 10th edition of Homework Space program in an open year format, available to anyone wishing to attend and free of charge. More than 350 participants from Lebanon, from the broader region and internationally took part in 5 chapters and 4 skill-based workshops. We were overwhelmed by the public's unprecedented enthusiasm vis-à-vis this edition of HWP, and we are convinced that amid precarious conditions, interdisciplinary forms of learning and exchange remain matters of great importance. The 2022 edition of the Homeworks program was similarly conceived and hosted a similar range, both in numbers and in backgrounds of participants from the world over. Furthermore, Ashkal Alwan was able to advance and strengthen its online presence and infrastructure by utilizing multiple digital platforms. Throughout this year, we worked towards the activation and enhancement of our new online streaming services for archival and video material, and we continue developing our digital archives as well as launching more editions of Ashra, Ashkal Alwan's video streaming platform. On March 2020, and after over 5 years of work, Ashkal Alwan made its archive available to the public. In addition to that, in June the same year, we launched what we called Perpetual Postponement, an online publishing platform featuring newly commissioned textual and audiovisual interventions from artists, scholars, and writers based in the region and beyond. However, this institutional move towards privileging the digital hasn't been, of course, without its limits. Today, Lebanon witnesses electricity rationing, which amounts to 22 hours a day due to diesel shortages. Simply opening Ashkal Alwan's door has become a great feat. Daily, we are forced to deal with a volatile local currency to power our generator, to fill our water tanks, and to maintain an internet connection. Increasing diesel prices and dependence have dramatically hiked our power expenses and continue to rise, of course, due to the global situation. As the cost of running our current space becomes nearly impossible amidst compounding crisis, we have opted, after much deliberation, to relocate Ashkal Alwan's current venue to a more compact and energy-efficient space. And we continue with our mission and our statement that there will be no fixed and no rigid programming. Organizational flexibility, agility, and openness will be privileged to allow community members to co-shape the space's function and potential, with, of course, a focus on education and knowledge through skill-based exchange and discussion. Hopefully, very soon, in 2023, we will continue with the 12th edition of HWP, and we plan to adopt a hybrid format, gearing in-person activities towards artists in Lebanon, providing them with a monthly allowance and sustained mentorship to fellows wishing to develop their practices, and continuing to offer online courses to international participants. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will hear from Yuliia, Hnat. Thank you.
Thank you to you all. Thank you to Manifesta. Thank you to Kosovo City and Conference and Association of International Biennales. And I represent here our NGO, Museum of Contemporary Art. And I'm a co-founder and board member. And we are a team of teams. And in our team and key partners, there are art historians, researchers, and curators, and of course, artists. and also experts in cultural diplomacy and communications professionals, and some of us are teachers and lecturers. There are legal experts, there are architects, project managers, emerging technologies experts, and a lot of wonderful professionals, other wonderful professionals. So, and I'm familiar with uncertainty, and due to my experience with uncertainty and complexity, due to my experience, which Alex mentioned in risk management, and also it's about business continuity planning, and it's about what should we do next day after catastrophe. And I hope, and so I'm a person who help to make some important things happen in difficult obstacles. And when we say about Museum of Contemporary Art in GO in 2021, it's about moderating process of creating a new type of professional institution, museum institution for contemporary art in Ukraine, and as a core element of the field development. Also, it's about uniting and involving artists and experts working with contemporary art in Ukraine. And it's about working on granting more access to contemporary art in Ukraine for professional community and broader audience, because we have a lot of problems in the field due to our problem in the museum sphere due to Soviet heritage in our culture field infrastructure. And so we, before 24th February, there were 3 directions of our strategic initiatives. It's about institutional field development and all tools, some tools we need to develop the field. And there are, for example, we established 3 groups, 3 expert groups to work on Museum of Contemporary Art issues. It's researchers, museum practices, and organizational framework. And also it's about, for example, such tool as a database, which is aggregator of collections, private and public collections of contemporary art, to gather this different part of the body of contemporary art of Ukraine. And it's just examples, some of our projects which we developed before the 24th of February. And also it's about projects in science and education. We developed the project Art in Education with the science, with the small Academy of Science of Ukraine. There is a laboratory for new content in education. And it's about using visual arts as a source of information about the history. And it's just one example, and we were developing the methodology to implement in the educational process in schools in Ukraine. And these projects are on hold now. Some of them we're trying to restart, but it will be later. And the third direction is about interaction with the authorities. It means projects that provide guidance from the professional community and support to the state institutions. As I mentioned before, we have some kind of Soviet heritage in the patterns, in the infrastructure of culture field. It's also the institutionality in our state authorities. In bureaucracy and a lot of ideology patterns, I would say, in these institutions, and we should to deal with this, and it takes time to re-establishing these institutions. And we have, for example, a legal research project to develop changes into legislation which regulates the art system circulation, artwork circulation, and other issues. Also institutional legal entities in the cultural field. And now, I'm sorry. I don't know. Wait. Okay. Thank you. And yes. And after 24th of February, we felt that importance of our mission have only raised. So voices of Ukrainian culture professionals and artists are a crucial element of sharing our values, vision for future, and understanding what we are fighting for. And museum is important, institution is important, but we need people, we need communities, we need artists and cultural workers to work within these institutions. That is why our actual priorities reflect these changes. And that is why the first priority for us now is community, emergency support for artists, cultural workers, and opportunities for art community development during the war. So art practices, to support art practices and special curatorial projects on important subjects for us to deal with this war. And also, for us, it's important to have the vision and to stay in the long-term distance. So that is why country transformation development connected with the advanced art system is also important for us, and we try to deal with two directions: emergency and visionary. Strategic direction. And when we established the Emergency Art Fund with our partners, Media Zaborona, the Naked Room Gallery, and culture institution, State Culture Institution, Mistecki Arsenal, to deal with these challenges. And we established this in March, just 9-10 days after the full-scale invasion. And our motivation was to be agile, to be quick, to deal with these challenges. So for this period, from March to October, we have 2,000 individual requests and more than 700 of paid aids and also curatorial projects. And some of funds we agree with donors to use for the for working with memorialization topics, with decolonial topics, and other important topics for us now. And we fundraised more than about 400,000 euros, and I hope this doesn't end. And our key institutional supporters, you see here, the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, Tiger Foundation, Prince Claus Fund, the Sigrid Rosen Trust, International Renaissance Foundation, Mitost, European Culture Foundation, Art Basel, Ukrainian Institute for Modern Art, Chicago. So it's all about the professional support from our colleagues from outside of Ukraine, and it's very, very important for us to cooperate with colleagues. And as I mentioned before, the second priority is art practices, which are conducting now in this moment. That is why our colleague curatorial group, Olga Balashova, Tatiana Lisun, Halina Gleba, they are art historians. They started to observe the artists' practices during the war, and they started gather together the images of these artworks, which artists placed in this social media, and they just gathering this into Google folders, but from the March. But now they trying to make it open website for this archive. There are more than 5,000 of images and more than 180 artists. And also, this archive was represented. Yes, it's important. Making art and perception of images is a critical and necessary skill in the most difficult circumstances. It's not news for the audience here, but it's worth to mention. And now I just show you some slides with these artworks, and and I will be silent in this moment because I will help artists to talk. And my colleagues, curators of this archive, they prepared some exhibitions from April. The first one was Piazza Ukraina. It was the first physical manifestation of the archive in the at the 59th Venice Biennial, and curators of the Ukrainian Pavilion and Piazza Ukraina, Lisa German, Boris Filonenko, and Maria Lanko, use the wartime art archive to make a selection of works to the street posters for the installation in Giardini. And this one, the picture of this installation. And later in July, they prepared the Art of Coping with War project at the World Bank Group headquarters. And also now our group is working on the exhibition at Museum of Fine Arts at Boston. And it's about the other project, Wounds of War. It's working with the trauma of the Russian-Ukrainian war and the project of its future members. There is an initiative group with our partners who works with past. The title of this initiative is Past Future Art. And we have challenges. And the first challenge is World War scale. It's demand to develop a language to remember it, to talk about it. And the sustainability of society depends on constructing a vision and future by looking into the mirror of the past. And to heal the wounds of war, it's important not only to create memorials and state commemorative programs, but also to form a social practice of discussing the past. And how we should work. Government and civil society cooperation, interdisciplinary professional work, and interaction with stakeholders. And this is the last slide in my speech. It's about dilemmas, so-called dilemmas we have to consider. How to deal with certainty or uncertainty, how to be safe and to feel unsafety. We feel unsafe in terms of our life. When I say we, I mean Ukrainians. We feel, and of course other people in conflicts. We feel unsafe in terms of our life, but we feel secure in terms of our present and future because we have our agency in these changes of reality, and we know our problems. We're looking not only locally, but globally, and we know our enemies and our friends. And so I appeal to the audience, if you want to act, you just contact us and we will develop actions together because there are a lot of projects I cannot represent here, but they are in the practice field. So just do it together. Let's do it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuliia. And thank you also for the appeal. I hope that's also something we will develop in the Q&A later. I want to invite our last panelist to take the stage. Thank you, Lara, for joining us from Amsterdam. You were meant to be here, but unfortunately that was not possible. But we're very happy to have you, at least remotely. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Christian. Thanks, Hur, Marike, for the invitation. It's very unfortunate that I cannot join you, as I was very excited to join you in person in the conference, but also to see Manifesta and to visit Kosovo. But my back kind of betrayed me, and I'm now on muscle relaxants. So excuse me for the slur. It's not that I'm drunk at like 11:30 in the morning or anything. But I am instead speaking from my kitchen table in Amsterdam. I've been listening intently to colleagues in the panel. Thank you, Kateryna, Reem, and Yuliia for these interesting talks. And just to say that there has been a conversation, a short conversation about what to present. There's a lot, too many issues, things that have been happening that would make sense in this panel. So the first thought was to speak about Documenta 15 and what had happened to us, and how the narrative was hijacked by the media and politicians, and there was no kind of opportunity left for any educational moment or mutual learning, unfortunately, and how could biennials avoid or deal with this. But I'm assuming that a lot of you know about this and have been discussing it, but also that we don't want it to hijack our narratives as well. And other projects and collectives that I am a member of, especially working in Palestine, and referring this also crisis and moments of education to Palestine. I mean, there's the School of Intrusions that Noor Abed and I have started a few years ago, as well as question of funding. Perhaps I can speak about those at the end if there is time remaining. But I chose to go with this text I had written a couple of years ago, so before the full-fledged Russian war on Ukraine, but that actually linked to Ukraine a little bit, but had to do a lot with a debate, an ongoing debate in Palestine that has to do with the constant destruction and reconstruction, and which involves the building of museums as one way of kind of dealing with this reconstruction of narrative, of collective memory. And many of us have been in conversation and debating this in Palestine. And so, this is kind of referring to it, and I guess it would link to my colleagues in the panel as well. So the text, let me just share my screen. It is, this is the title, We're Still Alive, So Remove Us From Memory, which is from a poem by Mahmoud Darwish titled The Exiles Don't Look Back. It's about asynchronicity and the museum and resistance. And again, referring to this discussion ongoing for maybe the past 10 years about the building of many museums in Palestine. And I explore what a museum in resistance could mean, but in this case, it could also mean an institution in resistance or a biennial in resistance as well. The museum in resistance is not, as we imagine, a material structure and archive of a past struggle of emancipation. It's rather the generative collective disintegration of this material in the struggle for forging collective myths. The museum in resistance is a museum outside of time, as time is always controlled by hegemonic power.
Lara, sorry, just to stop you 1 second. We cannot see your screen.
Ah, really?
Yes.
Ah, because I'm not sharing screen.
Okay.
I'm only presenting to myself. Thank you. Yeah, 1 second. Okay. All right. So this was the first slide I was. You see it now?
Thank you.
Great. All right. So the Museum in Resistance is a museum outside of time, as time is always controlled by hegemonic power. It is a museum which does not reserve a record nor a trace, but rather shared knowledge in continuous circulation and transformation. Take one, the museum object in battle. In her essay, A Tank on a Pedestal, Museums in an Age of Planetary Civil War, Hito Sterel writes about a military tank that was stolen from the pedestal of World War II monument in Ukraine and used in battle during the 2014 conflict. Borrowing from Giorgio Agamben's work on the relationship between civil war and stasis, Sterel accuses the museum of being the site, perhaps even the engine, for a history which keeps returning and remains stuck in a loop. She defines the kind of history that returns by the reuse of the tank as partial, partisan, and privatized. A self-interested enterprise, a means to feel entitled, an objective obstacle to coexistence, and a temporal fog detaining people in the stranglehold of imaginary origins. In other words, the exhibition of the tank on a material site is complicit with this history, as it embodies it, makes it available and visible, causing its return. Following her argument, the museum functions as a time travel machine that hurls us back in loops of violence. The museum leaks the past into the present, and history becomes severely corrupted and limited. National museums work under the assumption that its objects are representative of its citizens, tacitly equal and homogeneous. However, this only continues to aggravate the residual tensions. Civil wars thrive on historical tensions and are usually propelled by national, ethnic, or religious binaries, which mask class struggle and injustice caused by the ruling national bourgeoisie. Still, museums present themselves as public institutions and the objects within them as owned by the citizens of the state. Exhibitions in this sense become a means for the representation of the nation. Thus, it is not illogical for citizens to reuse its objects. Once the objects are exposed and reused, the museum's time seeps out of its doors, infecting all its citizens and trapping them into a loop. The birth of the modernist museum has always been associated with revolution, with the Louvre as the emblem of this history. If the museum is post-revolutionary, it is also post-colonial, as it is often one of the first institutions to be built post-independence. In the Palestinian context, however, time outside the museum is still under settler colonialism, and resistance to this is still underway. So while the debate around decolonizing the museum is rooted in post-colonial time, the colonization of Palestine continues, and the struggle against it ensues as an elongated present. We therefore find ourselves in an uncanny situation where we suffer the symptoms of a new post-independence nation state with new national museums, local authorities, and a neoliberal economy, while still under settler colonial rule and without sovereignty over land, people or infrastructure. Right? I mean, you hear like the museums get raided all the time by Israeli military. Like the Prisoners Museum in Al-Quds University has been raided many times, where objects are taken from it and sabotaged. Considering this asynchronicity with the temporal rhythms of the national and modernist post-revolutionary museum, what happens to the objects within them, and how do they remain active in the present? Take 2, fugitive objects. The Yasser Arafat Museum in Ramallah.
Lara, do you hear us? Can you just
yes.
wait a second? We have a little technical issue on our end.
Sure. Is it the Yasser Arafat image?
You're back. Probably. Go ahead. You can go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So, take 2, fugitive objects. The Yasser Arafat Museum in Ramallah exhibits a number of weapons, some with a symbolic provenance. One such weapon is the personal pistol of the late Yasser Arafat. Another belonged to the late Khalil al-Wazir, whom we call Abu Jihad, co-founder of the Palestine Liberation Organization. This is the second pistol. Wait, so Abu Jihad is co-founder of the PLO and commander of the armed wing of Fatah. Yet there is a stark difference in the ways the 2 pistols are exhibited. While the pistol of Arafat, while the pistol of Arafat is displayed behind museum glass near the famous speech he gave at the 1974 UN General Assembly, Abu Jihad's is only represented by a photograph, as you see here. Arafat's pistol has had a symbolic function ever since he spoke the most famous lines from his 1974 speech. Today I have come bearing an olive branch and a freedom fighter's gun. Do not let the olive branch fall from my hand. It's a very famous statement from his speech. And he was the first leader, I think, to be let into the UN with a pistol. Almost 50 years later, encased in museum glass in Ramallah, the pistol is evidence of the death of that revolutionary era for the leadership. It represents the trigger for the museum's present-day politics, collaboration with settler colonial powers through censorship, repression, and security coordination. The picture of Abu Jihad's pistol, on the other hand, is like a hole in the museum. From this crack, present-day reality seeps in. Underneath the photo, the label reads, the gun was obtained from the family of the martyr, but the museum has not yet been able to bring it from Gaza. Abu Jihad was assassinated in 1988 in Tunis by the Mossad. The pistol carries traces of this assassination, as the handle is shot off. The reason why the museum cannot physically obtain the pistol is because it is impossible for his widow to transport it through Erez, one of the Israeli checkpoints encasing Gaza in an impenetrable siege, as you know, for over 10 years. Every time I visit the Yasser Arafat Museum, I wonder why the photo of Abu Jihad's pistol is exhibited. Since the museum is an obvious site for claiming the death of a revolutionary era and setting the stage for the narrative of the present political regime, peaceful negotiations, security coordination, and political complicity with the Israeli settler colonial regime. The photo of Abu Jihad's weapon posits an opposing narrative of the museum. Naturally, we all know that the museum and any other conduit for hegemonic ideology, for that matter, is not omniscient, and that it leaks, breaks, and falters. However, this looks like a very deliberate curatorial decision. A photo of the pistol behind museum glass. I would postulate that it is an attempt at defunctionalizing the pistol even while it is outside the museum. The museum would like to capture both militant past and present and put them to their death. Thus, it situates resistance to settler colonialism in the past in an attempt to frame everything in a post-colonial time. Therefore, it carries within it the contradiction and tension within the museum. However, contrary to the desire of the museum, the photo of the pistol has invoked various stories, rumors, and myths as to why the pistol is missing. In fact, the photo looks like a wanted poster. The museum wishes to capture the fugitive pistol, but as sometimes happens with wanted posters, its purpose backfires, transforming the outlaw into a popular figure of rebellion. In the undercomments, Stefano Harney and Fred Moten write of the fugitive as the outlaw, as the rebel, the one who stands their ground against the settlers. Evading the relationship between the powerful and powerless, the fugitive is rather the one who transgresses this relationship of binaries by refusing to be corrected. Similarly, some objects are compelled by colonial powers to refuse to enter the museum, to refuse to be transformed into pure post-colonial form, into corpses of colonial time. Take 3. The museum before or after the revolution. So as I mentioned before about the Louvre, the Louvre is considered by many to mark the birth of the modern museum. And the conversion of the palace into a museum was propelled by the French Revolution. As discussed by Groys, the decision by the revolutionary whether to destroy the palace or not was resolved by converting it into a museum, an iconoclastic response which turns everything in the museum into material evidence of the death of the past regimes. This irrevocable death marks a new political era outside the museum. It defunctionalizes its objects, transforming them into art. So the museum's time, according to Groys, is after the end of a revolution. The museum in this way functions to deem not only what is inside it as irrevocably dead, but also the revolution itself. Revolutions are defined by the present, as they are usually the moment of destruction of the present regime. Once this regime is destroyed, the revolution is destroyed along with it. Museums are built to commemorate those revolutions. They become both evidence of the death of a past regime and a guarantor that another revolution is unnecessary. This is precisely the case with the Yasser Arafat Museum. It commemorates the history of the militant era, or what Palestinians refer to as the Palestinian Revolution, subsequently hurling it into the past. With the post-revolutionary museum in place, there is no longer a reason to revolt. Time in the modernist museum moves between history and future. The present is only a tunnel. History is employed to determine the future, and the future is rather posited as the present. Take 4, the secret. There's another notorious gun in the Palestinian imaginary. During the continuing Nakba of 1948, many Palestinians buried their valuable belongings ranging from photos to gold in their backyards or secret locations. So they are able to retrieve them once they return, not knowing that many of them will remain buried for decades. However, the stories of those underground remainders keep circulating in the diaspora and across generations. In the satirical, amazing novel called The Secret Life of Said, the Pesoptimist by Emil Habibi, there's such a story. The novel centers around the strange time of the Nakba aftermath, chronicling the struggles and transformations of the anti-hero, Said, and his family. The story spans 2 generations, where his son where a father, it's a story about a father and a son, and the son is empowered by buried objects. Two secrets haunt the novel. The first is that Said is a collaborator with the new regime, and the second is a buried treasure box that his wife's family hid in a cave near their village, Tantura, before they were forcibly expelled in 1948. Eventually, their son finds the treasure box, which contains guns and gold, and becomes a fida'i, or a resistance fighter. The Nakba of 1948 defined the Palestinians as a collective through the shared experience of death and expulsion. The moment of death and burial is simultaneously the moment of birth and reproduction. Therefore, the novel's return to the buried treasure follows this form of movement. Throughout the novel, the buried treasure functions like a promise of salvation, a reminder of a possible return, the potential for some kind of emancipation. Indeed, the story of the treasure box enables the son to become a resistance fighter. The act of burial produces life. The stories of the buried objects circulate among the Palestinians. They are kept alive through continuous oral chronicling. Take 5. What about the present? In an essay about the commons called All Shall Be Unicorns, Marina Wishmet writes about the notion of the commons and art activism in relation to time. She juxtaposes communist time with commonist time, right? Like the communism and the commons. Wishmet argues that the fulfillment of communism takes place after the revolution. Thus, it exists in the future, while communist time takes place in the present. Communism, or the commons, is rooted in the present because instead of waiting for the future revolution or political mobilization against the state or making demands from the states, it launches its affirmative projects in the here and the now. In the modernist conception of time and its association with progress, the present and the future become binary as we resist the present and work towards a better future. According to Wishmet, the commons is still future-oriented, but embodied rather than using time as a medium for its realization. The commons does not oppose the present, but proposes an active reconstruction of it from within, kind of reform. Moreover, this idea of progress, which sees the present as the tunnel for the future, is at the very core of capitalism, as financial markets are based on future projections and speculation. Postponement and delay are tactics of the market and a means to control the present. Practices of the commons are also rooted in the everyday. The museum in struggle needs to be a site of burials. As Groys writes, contrary to the prevalent narrative of calling the museum a graveyard, the graveyard is a space full of possibilities. Stories about graveyards abound. Death in the graveyard becomes generative. Spirits inhabit the present. In popular culture, there are many stories about corpses awakening at graveyards, less so at museums. The secret and promise of finding the treasure box in the Pesoptimist functions in the same way. The buried treasure box reminds the son of his mother's village and the necessity for return. Similar to Abu Jihad's missing pistol, the story of the object and its emancipatory powers survives because of its lack of exposure. This is the last slide. All right. Take 6, Archives in Resistance. The Museum of Resistance is a museum engaged in struggle. Therefore, it is a museum outside of time. During the first Intifada in Palestine in 1987, underground communiques were discarded by burial. They were deemed illegal by the Israeli military. And any Palestinian caught reading or in possession of one of the communiques was arrested. So the communiques had to disappear after they were read. Burning was not an option since the traces are incriminating. So it is said that they were dumped in wet construction sites or buried underground. The future material exposure of these documents implicated their readers and authors. This is precisely the danger of the exhibition of a material archive during a struggle. Any record is incriminating. To be outside of time is to be outside the reaches of the archive and surveillance. It is through the collective practice of struggle and resistance that a community can attempt to be outside of time. It is through preserving a secret together. The late 80s in Palestine were distinguished by collective emancipatory knowledge and knowledge production and radical imagination. Another form of an archive in resistance is a book, the one you see in front of you. It is named فلسفة المواجهة وراء القضبان, or the philosophy of confrontation behind bars. This book was smuggled in fragments inside of capsules that were ingested, right, by political prisoners, and was circulated outside and inside of Israeli prisons to educate Palestinians about how to confront political imprisonment. The book does not contain any publishing information. Neither the author, the publication date, nor printing information are mentioned. A colleague, Ismail Nashif, writes about the deliberate absence of this information. The main characteristic of the space-time of the no-naming practice is the fact of being out of reach of the colonizer's surveillance practices. But in the case of philosophy of confrontation behind bars, this being out of reach is not a passive, fragile insulation. On the contrary, the invisibility is capitalized on to resist the colonizer whose eye is blinded by the secrecy. The act of not naming blinds the colonizer's eye or discourse. The absence of the information places the book outside of a record of time and space which the colonizer controls. To achieve this resistance to the time and space of the colonizer, authorship should encompass the collective. The author becomes collectivity. The record of knowledge by the Palestinian collective body was materialized and circulated because it was necessary to share in and for resistance. However, the way it was disseminated protected the collective instead of exposing it. The absence of a date places this body of knowledge outside of time, making it impossible to capture, yet available to everyone. The underground authorship and circulation of collective knowledge is one of the aspects of a museum in resistance. The medium of this museum is continuous collective dissemination rather than a building made of concrete with an immovable collection about resistance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Now we're going to actually open the floor for Q&A, but I just want to take a moment as well to thank our panelists for their really compelling talks. I will just mention, Yuliia, when you had the slides of Ukrainian art that's made over the last 8 months, and that quiet while looking at the work spoke louder than almost any words. So thank you to all of you. And I believe we have a few mics which will pass around the room. So welcome to raise your hand and speak with any of our panelists. And please kindly introduce yourself and where you're coming from.
So one of my questions is, since the panel discussion is about the power of culture, education, and mediation, are there any art academies or schools and universities still functioning, and to what sort of curriculum or what sort of program are they now functioning in Ukraine?
I mean, it's really hard to me to speak about art academies because I have nothing in common with them, because I didn't finish the art academy and I have journalistic background and I do not work with them now. But what I'm seeing now that this is like very specific questions. It's quite hard to me to answer what kind of curriculum do they have now. But the situation with Ukrainian art education is quite interesting because it's not only official institute, but also a couple of very vivid and bright examples of how artists create organizations and NGO dedicated to the educational field. Like, for example, Method Fund, which was established by very famous artist Lara Konechna with her friend and colleague Kateryna. I'm so sorry, I forgot. Kateryna Badyanova. So they had before a couple of it's not the semester, this is like a call of schools which they created each year for people who applied and who want to learn something in contemporary art field. And they invited not only artists, but also art historians, theorists, people who want to work in cultural management, but still like who want to develop thoughts and to work in like intellectually, and who want to like bring to the artworks this like contextual background. So they moved to Germany, and now based there, they developed their school this year online, and this school dedicated to the decolonial optics to Ukrainian art. And this is just one example what is happening. But in general, people want to, I mean, it's not only about the educational field. All of Ukrainians now feeling that they should do something. But most importantly, they should continue in their work, because all our history, it's about these depths and in the losing connection. So the most important now to continue and to develop their strategies and work that have been done before, and not to lose all of this. So they continue in with online formats. They continue in being present in exhibitions, for example. Just recently, Lara Konechna and Katya Badyanova did exhibition with Poland Museum. So they like trying to do something with that. So I would say that maybe the situation in official institution haven't changed a lot, but for such initiative, the situation with war is crucial, because they doing all of this mostly based on their enthusiasm, right? And because of their belief that they could help new generations, because they didn't have this help from the previous generation. But also I want to add in the situation with Art Academy in Kyiv, for example, that have been developed in 1917 during the Ukrainian National Republic. And it was quite difficult time in Ukraine since 1917 to 1922, when Soviet Union was developed. So this art school was again made by 6 artists as a grassrooted initiative. They had connections with the parliament at the time, but the case it was they have this energy and desire to create new institutions, and the most interesting thing that this institution that have been created by 6 quite different artists who have different ideological agenda is still present. The question what they teach and what kind of curriculum do they have, and also who is teaching there, because it's a lot of the questions how to make it more contemporary and more critical, but still it's interesting how this grassrooted initiative become quite prominent art institution. But the thing is that half of them was killed by Soviets at the end. So it's a big question how we will save our institutions, and that Yuliia said before, it's very important to work for community and with community, because this is how we like trying to protect our history and how we want to bring knowledge to other generation. And as many speakers today also was talking about the knowledge production, I agree this is a huge problem, but I think that the question with knowledge production is also about value of this knowledge. It could be a lot of different articles, different books, but still it wouldn't influence of people who are speaking on taking floors. So the question is not produce more and more information, but even, yeah, it is a question to produce more and more information, but still it's a question to bring all that knowledge that have been done before, not only by us, but for like by other people.
Hi, I'm Gabriela. Thank you so much for your talks today and for letting us know about this unsettling processes, but also all the amazing strategies that you are making to overcome these situations. Kateryna, thank you so much for telling about your flat being bombed. I definitely wouldn't have the same calm, I'll say, to talk about it. It happened to me, and it's very beautiful to see your emotional process to bring this to us. Thank you so very much. I would want to ask you, I think if it's possible for you to give us like a quick response into how can we from outside support your projects, your ideas, the strategies, because we are not there fighting with you, but we are from outside trying to understand how to support this somehow. So if you can, like a Reem and Lara too, or Yuliia and Kateryna, if you can tell us which are the ways that you can see that we are from outside this unsettling movement, things that are happening to you, that how can we support you? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's you should to make a decision what kind of support you want to make, because there are the issues regarding funds, there are issues regarding developing solutions for complex issues. For example, I didn't represent the one of our project we developed with the National Agency of Corruption Prevention in Ukraine, because this agency has a mandate to work with searching assets of sanctioned people, for example, and it's a very important element of security, international security processes, because we should, to solve the local problem, we should to deal with the global problem. And that is why the existing tools, if existing tools are not do not work, we should develop other tools. And we could schedule meeting and to discuss a very practical cooperation.
I would be maybe more direct in this question. The easiest way to help, it's donate money, because we need to develop our army to resist and to oppose the Russian. So we had lots of foundations for that, and the most established one, it's called Save Life, Повернись живим. You also, if someone uncomfortable with donating money for the army, you can always donate money for civilians initiative to help people who displaced, who lost everything in this war, like home, families, like many things, and also there is some initiatives who then collecting money for helping animals, and this is like critical because, for example, in Mykolaiv, the biggest zoo in Ukraine, and Mykolaiv is constantly under shelling, and all of these animals in critical situation. So in the beginning, for example, people just didn't know what to do. They buy the tickets to the zoo, and of course no one goes there, but just to give them money to survive. So there is many ways to do, but of course also the easiest way is share information, because now the attention from the media is less than it was in the beginning. So the sharing information and talking about Ukrainians, it would be also quite helpful. Thank you.
Can I ask also the other two panelists to remind how we can help both in Lebanon and in Palestine, and what kind of support we can give you as an international crowd and audience? Thank you.
Thank you, Christian, for extending the question of support to us, because I think it's really also important. I mean, I think that, you know, in terms of Palestine and what is happening, not only in Palestine, but outside of Palestine in the cultural realm. So, for example, what has happened in Documenta 15, which was targeting the Palestinian artists, but also in general artists from the global south, and silencing voices, critical voices about the state of Israel by Palestinian and other artists. And I would say then the support would be to amplify silenced voices. You know, Edward Said says beautifully, you know, how with, you know, hegemonic states that have state institutions, museums, ministries of culture, you know, nuclear powerful, nuclear weapon powerful states, such as Russia and Israel, have powerful institutions that do their propaganda and tell the story and do the propaganda. The people, right, usually like the Palestinian people, for example, we have nothing but stories, right? And if people need to keep on telling the story so that the story survives, right? Once they stop telling it, it falls, it disappears. So I would say the most important aspect is to always make sure that these voices, no, of the people without these powerful states, whether it's Ukrainians or Palestinians or Lebanese, you know, that voices should not be silenced, and that everyone should carry these stories together so that they kind of survive.
I think my panelists have expressed very well the idea of how to help or how to support. Of course, there are this idea of funds or donating to the institution, but I think, as Lara already expressed very well, that today maybe recognizing the right history actually, and sharing the right information and moral support is what we lack in our side of the world. Help us fight censorship, help us fight or reach let our voices reach to the, clarify or eliminate substitutions and eliminate wrongful discourses about our regions. I will also encourage sharing information about the institution, participating in programs, helping us reach a sort of international exposure through these programs, because this is again, I totally support what Lara said. This is how we survive. I mean, this is the narrative survives, and the program survives, and our curriculum survive, and our discourses are for us maybe sometimes more important than financial support itself.
Thank you for intervening. I think that kind of rendered clear why we wanted to have a discussion about conflict and the power of culture, because it's really, well, conflict zones are really facing some fundamental common questions, and I think what you just said is rendered it quite evident. But there are more questions, so go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. My name is Kateryna, and I'm a curator who runs a biennial in Basel, Switzerland, but I'm also a Ukrainian curator, working a lot and writing about Ukraine. So I guess my question will be twofold, and I want to a bit expand maybe on what Katya and Lara were saying about giving a space for silent voices. In IBA, because we're here because of Manifesta, but also because International Biennial Association Conference, we were discussing yesterday with colleagues what biennials can do in times of crisis. And we were talking about creating safe spaces, about the freedom of curatorial and artistic expression, but we're also talking about the dialogue. And it seems to me that for the majority of my colleagues, it was very important to highlight and to stress that, yeah, biennials are there to provide safe space for a dialogue, for intercultural dialogue. My question to you would be now, how do you see the dialogue between artists that are on the different sides of conflict? What happens with the dialogue between oppressor and oppressed, between the perpetrator and the victim, between the colonizer and colonized? How is this dialogue for you? And that's the question for all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll do a round-robin format where everybody will have opportunity to respond to the question. Thank you very much, Kateryna.
It's a very interesting question and very hard, and I believe that in different contexts it could be answered differently. In terms of Ukrainian situation, I would say that for now there is no way for possible dialogue, any kind of dialogue, and it's impossible because we still have this gun in our our houses. Yes, we have this missile attack, we have Iranian drones, we have no enough protected air system, and when the situation would be changed, maybe then it would be a way for possible dialogue. Otherwise, there is no space for dialogue. But still, I have some more options. If you want to talk with someone, it's great to go in other places, because Ukraine have much more neighbors than one. We have not only Russia and not only Belarus. We have 7 countries with which we are neighboring, and maybe it's time to build a great dialogue with them and to rethink our common history. And as a person who was growing up in the borderland on the frontier, right, I understand that this is really important to figure out what is going on there as well. And I have lots of friends who live in Zakarpatska Oblast, and for some politicians it was like 2 complete opposite sides of Ukraine, the western one and the eastern one, but I have so much in common with them, and perhaps it's also the time and space to talk about them and to talk about their experience of living very close to Hungary, for example, or very close to Poland, and speak about that.
I think I only will add that I have doubts that there is a space for meta position in any conflicts.
Can I go?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's really not about two, you know, like it's not a binary of oppressor and the difference between oppressor and oppressed is much more nuanced. You have states, you have the state as an oppressor, and then you have the people. And I think that, for example, Jewish Voice for Peace in Berlin are being as silenced as Palestinians in Germany. So it's not about ethnicity, it's about political position, but it's also about, like in terms of my colleagues over there in the hall, there is always, it's very, very important to first acknowledge the power structure in any kind of dialogue. But I really don't see I don't see it as this simple of a binary. You have political positions and people that are vocal about their oppressive states, and so they are also as silenced as others, and there are different alliances, especially in the work of culture. So it's more, I think, about political positions and acknowledging always the power structure, because sometimes it also normalizes or makes an illusion that people are equal in terms of power and structures and infrastructures, and being able to be vocal. Yeah, but it's a very long discussion, I think, and never with a simple answer, and always depends on the situation, I would say.
It's a very interesting question, and it's a question I think that goes way back in history, and it's not a current debate, or it's not a very recent question, but I think the dialogue, if we can consider that there's a dialogue between oppressors and oppressed, is a one-way conversation, and one-way isolated conversation where the oppressor or the colonizer creates its own discourse and imposes this discourse on the oppressed, and not only imposes this discourse on the oppressed, but also transmits or uses the media to use this same discourse as a tool to explain that these oppressors are actually doing such acts in order to help the oppressed. So this is a conversation that dates years and years. It goes way back to today, and I also support what Lara said. It's not about ethnicity or any specific side or we don't have any specific examples, but this is a theme of power and morality, and has existed since the beginning of civilizations. The oppressors always have this discourse of saving the oppressed, because they are in need of to be saved. So again, I repeat and I emphasize on this one-sided, isolated conversation that is not a dialogue anymore. It's an isolation.
Thank you for the whole panel for answering. I think we have space for one more question.
Hi, my name is Asha, and I'm a Canadian curator based in Los Angeles. This is a question both focused on, at this particular moment, to Kateryna, Yuliia, but of course I'd love to hear all the panelists discuss this. Are you concerned at all that interest in Ukrainian artists at this particular moment and for the coming years will only continue as long as the position of victimhood and resistance is maintained? And do you think, or are you concerned at all that there will be an expectation that these artists will always have to be making work about political art and that they will be excluded from institutions or from the art world unless they're actually making work that is political? And of course, this very much applies to Reem and Lara as well. I'm curious about positions of victimhood as the new kinds of otherness. Thank you.
I think it is a big problem, and we see these connections between the desire to get some information about Ukrainian culture and art, and of course we want to be aware of this victimhood, and that's why I think not Yulia's presentation, not about that. And as I said, I really don't want to be someone who trying to use anything connected with this binary position of being victims or being someone who heroicized themselves. And we had this in the Soviet past, for example, and we know how the narrative about the Second World War was built, and this was built on the victimhood and heroization. And now, having all of this loss, we understand that we don't want to have this, because we really want to name all of these people who were killed, who suffered, and this is not about heroism as well. This is not about something else. But of course, I think that, as I believe that art is not, it could be not a political. Everything is political, especially now, especially knowing how artists work in such different circumstances, like being under the shelling, or like even like one artist from Mariupol, he drew his graphic series in a bomb shelter. So, and it's just a portrait of people who was with him at the time, but it's very political. So I think that it's also the question how to decolonize art. It's as well, not only our political agenda, but also art. Should we speak about some masterpieces, or should we speak about something which are fragile and invisible? Like, for example, my colleagues, Kateryna Buchatska, whom I mentioned before, and also Boris Filonenko, whom Yuliia, I think, mentioned, they created a residency program in Ivano-Frankivsk, and lots of artworks was not the material. Even we feel now that it is important to create objects, but for some artists it was important to make some gestures as well. So this is also a question how to archive it, how to talk about it, but it's not something that you can easily sell or easily reproduce, because this is very connected to the place, to the time, to context and storytelling as well. Yeah.
Lara and Reem, do you want to add something?
Sure, of course. And I would also like to, a bit related to the previous question, because I think this falls under the same subject. First, the identity that sells, and I don't want to use the word sell, but the subjects that are considered as exotic are subjects of war and violence and victimization and oppression and colonization. And something that Kateryna actually said in her presentation that really was really striking for me, it's not a question of brutality, but a question of justice. And I think as long as we are embedded in this narrative of being seen as, or being considered as the oppressed, or being considered as the underworld, we will always feel the civic responsibility in expressing this. I don't think that art can be, or I don't think art can express something outside of its realm. Art is immediately embedded in politics and in civicness and in the locality and in the environment that it emerges from. I don't think that artists will be excluded if they don't actually express this, but I think it, with time, and I'm talking about Lebanese art, I'm talking about Lebanese artists, of course, who sometimes I believe that this narrative of war and narrative of oppression is what is a sort of a passport for them to exhibit outside of Lebanon. Many of the films and performances or exhibitions that were exhibited outside of Lebanon actually targeted this question of memory, post-war reconstruction, archival information. It's considered as exotic, it's considered as important, and to relate it a bit to the previous question of the colonizing empires, it is also, this is why I was saying that it is also a tool to keep us in the same loop, and this never-ending loop of being stuck in this narrative and not be able to express something else. Maybe, I mean, I don't know, I'm thinking out loud with you today, maybe because we have not experienced something else at the same time, because we have been stuck in this position for quite some time. So yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, I mean, briefly, I just want to add, yeah, I agree very much with Kateryna and Reem. And I think that this also, the victimhood and the hero, maybe if we look at it differently, because I mean, art cannot be but rooted in life, or is really not separate from it, right? So it is also always, I think, when one looks at an artist's work, whether they are from Palestine or Ukraine or Lebanon or Switzerland, it's always political. I mean, the issue sometimes is that the audience looks at us as political subjects, and at other artists from other places that seem neutral, but are not, right? I mean, but it's also, what I want to say is that it is always valuable to look at maybe artists that are in struggle to learn from. It's more maybe, not as heroes, not as victims, but to understand also and learn from their kind of survival. Like, for example, with maybe just to say also like this way of maybe artists dealing with their work. Reem mentioned also that some artists, it becomes their passport into kind of Western art. But if one also, it has to do a lot with the logic of the art world as well, in terms of presentation. I think that artists work locally in different ways, in more affirmative, let's say, more affirmative ways. So I bring the example of question of funding in Documenta, because the project was multifaceted, where as the collective of question of funding invited another collective from Gaza called Iltiqa Group. And kind of presented Iltiqa collective as a 20-year-old collective that has survived in Gaza. Imagine, like, surviving as a collective of artists that also provide a space for other artists for 20 years. Looking at how they self-organized, how funding went, and it's a model of learning, you know, that other collectives could learn from anywhere in order to survive with tactics of survival. But also part of the project was Daira, which is developing a cryptocurrency in Palestine. And this was a big part of the project, and it was developed completely locally, right? So not in terms of presentation of what is happening in Palestine outside of it, but really working, you know, using art, working locally in order to build a kind of autonomy in the cultural, at least starting with the cultural. You know, collective. Yeah, perhaps this is one way of answering this.
Thank you, Lara. Thank you, Reem and Yuliia and Kateryna. I think we're coming to a close to the panel. Thank you very much for everyone that posed questions and for the audience. I want to leave Alex the last word as...
Yeah, thank you very much for everyone for participating. Lara and Reem, thank you very much for joining us over Zoom. I will mention that for our two Ukrainian colleagues, they will be appearing on Yatizhar's show this evening, so I welcome our local colleagues to tune in for that to continue the conversation. But thank you all, and looking forward to meeting more of you and speaking in the hall.